Welcome back to the Australian Retirement Podcast. Fantastic to be here with the very ethical Drew Meredith. Hello, mate. Lovely to see you. How you doing?
It's a great opening segue there. Yeah, very, very well. A little bit stressed because I'm trying to get through my ethics bridging course before the cutoff at the end of this year.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Hence the mention. All financial advisors, to my initial knowledge, were required to do an ethics bridging course, regardless of how long they'd been in the industry, had to pass the advisor exam, done all of those, signed up with the cutoff being 1 January 2026.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
What Drew didn't realise is that if you qualify under an experience pathway, which you definitely did, then you don't need to do that qualification.
Look at these grey hairs. Of course I did.
That's okay. It's only time and money. We've got lots and lots to get through today. We're going to talk about downsizing. Now, when we talk about downsizing, to be clear, we are not talking about reducing your employee workforce. We are
right-sizing. They call that right-sizing. We hired too many people before.
That's a nice term, actually, right-sizing. We're specifically talking about when your beautiful home is too big and you've decided that you can't be bothered doing the mowing anymore, or you're getting fed up cleaning those third and fourth bedrooms that you never use upstairs. It's time to change our house.
And I find it quite interesting because we only ever say downsizing, but in my experience, a lot of people that I work with actually end up upsizing. Actually, that sounds like something my 6-year-old says all the time.
I get that a lot too.
Yeah, actually, Dad, this is what actually happened. But it is, so we talk about downsizing all the time. And when we talk about downsizing, this is kind of an area of confusion as well. It doesn't mean you're going from 5 bedrooms to 1 bedroom or an apartment. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're spending less money on the new house. I mean, in the context of the government, it's the idea that you release equity by downsizing, but there's no requirement for you to downsize and have a smaller house, to stay in the same suburb, to not spend more money. Plenty of people upsize their house when they make this decision as well. So I think, again, there's no rule for everyone, but it's important to consider every side of that equation. And the idea of this, we've got a bit of a checklist that we can work through on. I think we tend to think about these things, or I do, probably more financially, and some people tend to think about them more emotionally. So this is the idea of this, to have a bit of a blend, use the emotional and the financial impacts. I mean, that's the nature of advisors. We're always going to be more financial and objective from that perspective, and let our clients deal with the subjectivity and the emotional changes that come with downsizing or upsizing.
Agreed. There's lots of good stuff to get through here, but critically, if you have a home that you think at some point in the future might need to be changed, then I think this episode's definitely going to be for you.
Yeah, and I think it's not just when you retire. It can be in the lead up to retirement, or there's a big trigger in your 50s, depending on how long if you have kids and how long your kids are staying at home. But an empty nest is kind of one of the big triggers for all these things.
Yeah.
And I find that super interesting. So a lot of people are so comfortable in their house that they don't even, it doesn't even trigger the need to think maybe the kids' room becomes a gym or becomes an extra office, or
it's a man cave.
Yeah, or a wine storage. Who knows? But it is. The question that comes in, I think it's so important when you're going through retirement or thinking about it, is constantly asking yourself questions like, the big one would be, does this home still suit our lifestyle? If you're traveling more, if you have a holiday house, if you're caravanning, if your kids live on the other side in different states, cities, countries, is that house still going to be what is suitable to your needs? And I think too often we kind of begin that too late, as opposed to kind of having that consideration and discussion earlier in retirement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And to speak to that too, I've a number of times sat down with people who haven't really considered a downsize, but they should have. There's no need at all to have this property anymore. In some cases, their quality of life is somewhat restricted by their finances and oughtn't be if they just use some of that money more effectively.
And the quality of life, because a lot of the time, if you have a bigger property because you had children, you're probably doing a lot of gardening, a lot of work around the house, and a lot of maintenance. But I think it is interesting because we see stats on this all the time. But you can own a $2 million house and be receiving the age pension because your house is exempt from the assets test. But if you sold that house and downsized and released, bought the average $1 million house, you could release $1 million in equity, which on your 1/15th rule could significantly increase the amount of income you could draw from your assets. But so often we we don't know the trade-off that we're making by just accepting the status quo. And I think that's incredibly important. And it's one of those areas of thinking about the financial impacts of downsizing as opposed to the emotional parts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. To add to this, and we're going to talk about the emotional attachment more, but something that I've seen done very well for people entertaining downsizing is the idea of rent vesting. Yeah. So let's keep our home for a while where we think we'd like to move to the beach. We think we'd like to. So the first big courageous step is not to sell the house and just go to the beach and then unfortunately after 2 years decide that this isn't quite what we were looking for. Put your house on the rental market and move to the beach, or obviously move to the beach and then put your house on the rental market, and then have 12 months where you can actually try that out. If it doesn't work, you can say it doesn't work and go back home. You haven't had the transaction costs. There's still, normally speaking, no impact for capital gains tax, even though it's been rented because there's a 6-year exemption. So there's lots of things to like about that. And if you're feeling uncertain in that middle ground, that's definitely a good option for you, right?
I think this is a big beach house kind of question as well, because there is a lot of people who have bought a house on a peninsula or on the coast or whatever, or in the country, whatever it happens to be, and have their main house up here. And they think retirement's going to be fantastic down there. Or they're thinking about buying that house in advance and putting a whole heap of capital into it while they're still working or not even retired. But this is, and it's so much easier to do this than it ever has been, which is the try before you buy. As you're saying, like rent, if you think you might want to live in Torquay, about like all the other side, Sorrento, whatever it happens to be, you've got the ability now to test it out before committing yourself. And that kind of links to one of the second things you need to think about, which is the costs that come with these type of decisions.
Yeah. And if you're downsizing, it's not uncommon at all to be really surprised about the likely costs that you're going to incur to get that done. If we think about a traditional sale, you're going to have stamp duty, you're going to have legal fees, you're going to have removalist costs, you may have rent depending on where you're moving to and that time frame. You're going to have agent fees, which are going to be a reasonable amount of the property.
Yep.
And all of these costs are going to stack up, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest one that we forget about is stamp duty, and then land tax if you're holding that property in advance. But stamp duty is something like 5.5% of the value of your property. And if you think about that, that's 6% of $1 million average house, $60,000 coming out just to change house. So I think these are some of the big decisions where we have these things in mind, but we need to start working through them and look at the financials and think, in some cases, with all the costs, it's probably close to 10% that comes in.
Yeah, often like stamp duty, agents fees, conveyancing costs, removalist fees.
Moving, plus the emotional impact that comes with it. And sometimes if you put all that on a piece of paper and started planning ahead, you might go, well, actually, I could do a renovation that makes my house more future friendly and more livable, and get that done at the same or less cost, and not deal with the same amount of change and stress. And that I think something we don't either we consider too much, where we have people who are just want to do the renovation, and people who just want to buy or just do the downsize, rather than going through the process. And maybe that's hopefully this episode helps people be guided in that direction as well.
I think about, if I may, the emotional attachment, the fact that there's your home has so many memories. Yeah. There's so many, even the idea of, even if your kids have moved out, it's just, hopefully you've got some beautiful memories in your home. And most importantly, it's a place where you feel happy and stable and settled. And whether you're a pre-retiree or a retiree, it can be pretty unsettling, that whole moving away from friends, your closest mates who live on the same court, all of those sorts of experiences. That's hard to weigh up, right?
I find this the hardest part for a lot of clients I've worked with, which is dealing with the emotional side of moving house. That they have had their children there, they're like the family house forever. And I've got examples of where it's gone well and where it's gone poorly. There's an example of a family that we worked with who had a large house, also had a beach house, didn't want to move, decided to do a large renovation, like very significant renovation to that house to stay there. And as part of that conversation, we said, well, you have a couple of options here. You can make a decision and sell one of the properties now. You're never going to access an age pension because you have multiple properties, not because you have properties, but because the value of those properties is over the limit. But you can either realize is sell one of these now and do the kind of work that you want to do, and live with a higher level of income or live with a more have more chance of your capital outlasting you, or you can draw down on all your assets and more aggressive, take the same income as you usually would, but reduce your superannuation balance until it gets close to zero, at which point you're going to be forced to sell something. And we've worked with this family for so long, we actually saw the entire drawdown process. And it got to a point where they've sold the house, and yes, they're renovating the beach house and now moving into it, but it was almost forced upon them. And you'd be surprised the emotional impact of seeing your capital run down every year, I think was much more than they probably thought it would be.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, that yes, you could still generate the same level of income, but your capital is dwindling and you're kind of not attaching yourself to the decision that you could sell the house by doing it. So it turned out fine. House sold. Now they have significant, they've released that equity. They can have the same level of income or higher level of income than they needed to. But it feels like there were probably more cutbacks than needed to happen during that period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example, mate. What about in terms of market, like the timing of this? Like, when's the right time to start looking? And that's it for the podcast today.
That's it. We don't need any more on that. I think markets are incredibly difficult, isn't it?
Ignoring perhaps like market conditions, ignoring the markets themselves, but more so around in a behavioural sense. When should people start to think about this stuff? I mean, you flagged, of course, when perhaps the kids, when a combination of or the kids move out of the house or you boot them out of the house, whichever comes first. That's one.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell my house when it feels too big as well. So I should probably be considering the same thing. One thing I think we tend to forget about is the importance of friendships. Like, not sure about you, but if my friends move too far away, I'm not deliberately not trying to see them, but it is like, even from the northern suburbs of Melbourne being south of the Yarra, it's like 45 to 50 minutes.
Proximity is a big deal.
It does impact on your friendships, your community, and so much of that is tied to your mental health in retirement as well. I think in terms of market, it's about seeing those periods when things change. That's always a good trigger to go through these things and not avoiding them. And I think what we need to do in these cases is be thinking about where we want to live, as opposed to thinking that our home is an investment and that we should be trying to time the sale of that home into a good market for property. I find a lot of my conversations with people are about how do you separate the financial and lifestyle decision, because this is a lifestyle property. Where you want to live is going to be so central to your happiness and enjoyment that you don't need to worry about what the property market is doing to determine when to sell your home or when to downsize. It's got to be more lifestyle driven and individually driven, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, I completely agree. And hopefully, for those of you listening who at some point will be contemplating a downsize, hopefully that isn't financially driven. Yep. Hopefully, it doesn't come from a place of saying I need to free up capital for whatever costs I have, including retirement, but more so this house is no longer the right house for us and we want to move.
I mean, it's like, are you still using every bedroom? If you had 5 bedrooms, there's every chance that you're barely walking into 2. I mean, I had the same thing in my house. It was like there was just more stuff going in there, or there was just nothing in there and no reason to walk in there anymore. Like, keep turning the light on just to see if it was still there.
Still here. Yeah, check.
It's like, are you not using rooms? Is the double garage still what you need? Is the basement, do you have a pool? Pools are incredibly expensive. Like, anything to do with water. Is there a lawn? All these things are like, if you're not using them, you're not enjoying them, either kind of change your lifestyle or it's a good opportunity to review.
A little while ago, we had a really great conversation, or I had a really great conversation with some members when they're talking about a downsize. And the reason the conversation came up is because they've been talking about it for a long time. And it was just clear to see that they were stuck. There was a lot of decision fatigue here, probably some analysis paralysis around what do we do and what if we make the wrong decision, because moving is a big deal, especially if you're looking at selling your home and buying another home and you're not open, or you don't feel that the idea of just renting out your home for a time and staying somewhere else is a good idea. And so we went through an exercise that I think was really valuable, which was we asked them to list down all the things that they enjoy about their home and all the things that they don't enjoy about their home. And of course, there were in their case, there were lots more things that they enjoyed. Some of them were functional things, like, for example, it's really, really close to the shops. And some of them were more emotional things, like it's got wonderful memories and some of those important things. And then we asked them to think about where they like the properties of their ideal home and what that would look like, and to try to do that without a budget. Don't use the constraints of what you think is realistic because you've been looking at realestate.com.au. Just put down an exhaustive list of the things that you'd love. Some of them you can just carry straight across from your current home.
By a beach.
That's right.
Near a park.
Correct, yeah. And went through that process. Just what's the stuff that you'd value? Now, interestingly, they really struggled with that bit. They put down most of the things that they listed were already on their home. So they already had those. And there are only a few extra things which frankly didn't really seem sufficient to justify making a move. So is this just an itchy feet thing where you feel like it's time for a change? What we did is we encouraged them to think about their friends' homes and think about their family members' homes and so on. That they like, what do they like about their friends' homes? What do they like about their family members' homes? And as soon as they did that, the list exploded. It was, I love their kitchen. I love this particular thing, and it became a lot richer in terms of the things that they valued. So it's not unusual to find it quite hard, I think, to really put your finger on what sort of house you'd like to move into. Yeah. But if you want to do it, my experience is you'll be best positioned to do it by reflecting on the houses that you've enjoyed in the past, that you've been in the past and said, I like this element. Maybe you were traveling.
More recent history.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe you were traveling and said, oh, how nice is it having these open, like these shutter doors, these doors that open up and these beautiful bifold doors into the backyard. If that's the case, great, put it down. And what that enables us to do then is be a lot clearer around, we like this house because it ticks so many of our boxes and it doesn't have any of the absolutely nots.
Yeah, it's not just what my budget is.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that from an emotional perspective, that can create a little bit of excitement too around that eventual move. If you feel like you're stagnant here and perhaps it is time, but we just wouldn't know how to get started, really dialing into what you'd value can be a great way of eventually finding a house and saying, wow, I'm actually really inspired to try to get this one because it looks cool and it ticks so many of our boxes.
And it's getting easier and easier to filter on realestate.com or domain in terms of all the things that you're looking for. Like not as hard as it used to be where you just put a dollar figure and you had to search and search and search.
I'm still waiting for the douchebag neighbours box that you can tick out. I don't want those.
Complain about
noise complaints over the last 24 months within a 50-metre radius.
And I think, one of the interesting ones, and this is moving from emotional to the financial side, is what's the financial impact or benefit of doing it? I've gone through that case where people, put heaps of money into their property, took it out of their investable assets into their lifestyle assets, and not that they needed to, but gave up some level of lifestyle. They probably didn't travel as much as they could have because they chose to prioritize their home. We didn't suggest that. It was more be wary that you're going to be forced to do it at some stage. But you can actually see it if you're downsizing traditionally into a smaller or a more retirement-focused suburb, then you can actually release a lot of equity. And I wish your 1 out of 15 rule was a 1 out of 10 because it's much easier to calculate. But if you're thinking $1 million into a release of equity, 500, I'll do $1 million because it's easier. Then you're essentially bringing out an extra $25,000 a year in income overnight that you could be adding to. And if you think about that, if I go from like so many houses in Australia, Melbourne and Sydney have gone up so significantly, $2.5 million house with 5 bedrooms to 1.5 bedroom house with 3 bedrooms, probably not the same suburb. You released $1 million, you've just added a pretty solid overseas trip to your expenses every year.
Comfortably, without eroding the capital and then some.
And I think when you can put those financial trade-offs in front of people, it does become much easier to make those decisions. But obviously that just is for people who have significant houses and significant value in their houses as well. So a lot of the cases, it can help you release the ball and chain that is a mortgage. And I think that is where, as opposed to, I think a lot of people access their super fund as they get to retirement to essentially pay off their mortgage to free up their cash flow in retirement. Whereas by making changes with your house, you may actually have the opportunity to do that and keep your superannuation intact.
Yes.
So I think it's always looking at those. And we know by and large, it's you don't want to have a mortgage in retirement. One, because you don't have a salaried income anymore. But two, because it's a big drain on your cash flow.
Yeah, completely agreed. And what's more, and as you mentioned before, one of the possibilities here is also upsizing, which might end up being that the ideal place that you want. Although we started on this journey thinking that we were going to free up capital, when we moved our home, or when we changed our home, we now realize that we're not. It's going to go the other way, and we're going to require more money in order to find the ideal place we want to live. If you've worked hard and you've built your wealth, then hopefully that's an option for you and something that you can look to do.
I've seen a lot of people overcomplicate that too, where they start thinking about, can their kids buy and get the first homeowners grant to help buy a part of their house that becomes their principal residence, KISS is the thing here. Keep it simple, and anything that you're trying to do with tax deductions has to be completely legitimate, is what I'd always say in that case.
Yep.
But upsizing, again, just trade-offs, understanding what you're giving up by putting more capital in. A lot of people make that decision without thinking about the financial impact. But I've run through this with quite a few clients as well, and at least they go in with open eyes and understand where their situation sits.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Australian Retirement Podcast. I'm Owen Rask, the founder of the Rask Group and Chief Financial Officer of Rask Invest. One of the great things about retirement is you get to switch off your active income and move into a mode where you rely on passive income from your investments. This can be a daunting time for a lot of people. In fact, most people in our community will seek financial advice at this time in their lives. So if you're watching the Australian Retirement Podcast, you should know that we have resources to help you find a qualified and vetted financial advisor. To get in touch with one of our financial advisors or partner advisors, you can head to the YouTube description that's below the video and simply click the link to get taken to a page where you'll find lots of resources for finding a financial planner. We've even created a matching tool which matches you to an advisor that we think may be suitable for your stage of life, your assets, or your goals. And you can also find resources on how to verify financial planners and their qualifications. That's all available in the link in your YouTube description. Let's get back to the show.
We spoke earlier about the idea of buying a house that's going to be suitable for the long term.
Yep.
And you've previously spoken about this idea of future proofing.
Yeah.
And when you buy your...
Not the conference.
yeah, that's right. If you're looking to buy your next home, what you don't want in retirement is to be flipping properties.
Yeah.
You don't, especially if you're going down, because the transaction fees are just going to be too high. Now, for a lot of listeners who perhaps have got a lot of experience buying properties and feeling comfortable buying and selling properties, you might say, hang on a moment, you can do pretty well flipping properties. And of course, that's true. But ignoring the idea that we're buying properties and then renovating them or making cosmetic improvements before selling them, flipping properties typically works best when you're going up the chain, because you're buying a higher value asset which has more capacity for growth. You're making changes to it which increases it commensurately higher, selling it, and then you're continuing on that journey. As a pre-retiree, when you're downsizing, flipping properties makes less sense because you're buying lower value assets. Yeah. And typically as you're buying lower value assets, then the commensurate growth you can get on each asset makes less sense.
Yeah.
And also, if you do that multiple times in your retirement, we just worked out it could be 8 to 10% of transaction cost in order to buy and sell a property. So you do that multiple times and can be quite erosive in terms of your overall balance. So there really is a need here for people to not just think about, well, is this the property that we want to live in right now, but take that step of saying, well, what is our life going to look like in 10 years or 15 or perhaps 20 years? Ideally, this is going to be our new long-term home, this big chapter in our lives. So let's buy an asset, for example, if you're 65, probably not wise to buy an asset that has tight flights of stairs, because it's going to create problems in the future, right?
I think there's a good Venn diagram here that's like the relationship between financial and emotional decisions when you're downsizing. I had this exact experience with my parents who are in their late 70s, and the idea that they were looking for houses that had multiple stories but no lift, like the accessibility, they're built on a hill. They have gardens that are difficult to tend. It's like, I just said tend.
Nice word. Might write that one down for later.
But being realistic, ultimately they did go from one house to another and ended up in one that is more suited, which is it's more vertical living. It has a lift. It's always accessible. It's easier to transport things like groceries, all these sort of things within the lift. And this wasn't an option when most people were retiring 20 years ago, but the option, developers are building more and more just for the retiree market. So single story living or vertical living, as long as it's accessible, all these sort of things, because your health will eventually deteriorate to some level. And I think that's important to keep that in mind, so you don't have to, as you were saying, keep eroding capital by selling and trading houses in.
Yeah. To add to that, one of my mates works with a major builder, a volume builder, and he was talking to me about them building houses now that are designed for like in anticipation of people that age. So, for example, we're going to build this house, and the house has a flight of stairs, but the handrail behind the plaster there is the mechanism ready to go to be able to carry you up that flight of stairs. Yeah, it's just hidden behind the plaster. It's built in at the time when the time comes that that you want to do that upgrade. It's very easy. We're just removing the plaster and adding adding the mechanism for it, and then we're good to go. But the framework, all that sort of stuff is there. So it's interesting how build designs might actually evolve over time. If you're looking at a new build as a 60 to 65-year-old, asking about, or any age indeed, but thinking about a long-term into retirement type asset, you may very well want to speak to the builders about how they can have built-in accessibility evolution over time to make sure that this is going to continue to be the right home for me.
Yeah, and that tells you about the quality of the builder as well, doesn't it? Where they're considering who their market's going to be and where property in the market's going to go.
Yeah.
And we're all living longer and longer than before.
Yeah. Now, if you are going through a downsize, you're selling your home and then you are moving to a home where the costs are lower, then you're going to free up capital most of the time. And the government has come in with, it's been around for a little while now, but a fairly nifty strategy, a superannuation strategy called the superannuation downsizer contributions. Yeah. This is a big strategy for some people. Would you mind speaking to it?
Yeah, I think the key here is that you can access per person an extra $300,000 in contributions. Technically, they are a non-concessional contribution, as in you don't get a tax deduction on them, but they don't fall under your non-concessional contribution cap. Mm-hmm. And they're not impacted by the total superannuation balance cap, which means if your balance is over $1.9 million or $2 million, if it's after 1 July 2025, you can still make this contribution into your superannuation fund. You may not be able to get it into your pension account, depending on what your balance is if you're around those levels. So that's $300,000 per person per event, essentially. And the things I see people getting most caught up on is you need to be at least 55 and over now. It was 65 when first introduced in 2018. It was 60 from 2022. It's now 55. So they're allowing people to downsize earlier and earlier. The idea, I guess, was to free up more of the residential property market. But what I see most people get caught by here is the 90-day rule to get your money into superannuation and making that election. So you have to actually do a form. If it's a self-managed super fund, you don't have to send the form anywhere, but you have to have it on record. But you have to get the money in before 90 days. 91 days, you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. They're probably the two biggest things. Yeah. And you went pretty niche on this in another episode. I think we had a question which I think is super relevant to this too.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if we'll find it and we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah. But to add to that idea of these contributions, again, $300K each. So if you're a couple, $600. Yeah. The fact that these don't form part of your non-concessional contribution cap is actually huge.
Life-changing.
Let's consider, for example, you've got some Australians with a house that they've bought. It's done remarkably well over a number of years, and it's now worth 2.5 mil, and they simply just don't need anything anywhere near that. Now, perhaps circumstantially, for whatever reason, they've got very little money in superannuation, they've got very little retirement assets, and they're of the view that eventually we're going to downsize the home. So these people might elect to sell their property for 2.5, and for simplicity, they're going to buy a property much smaller, much simpler at 1.2. They're going to, however they do that, there's lots of ways that could be possible. There's now let's call it 1.3 million that's sitting to the side here. Well, you can conceivably get almost all of that money into the superannuation. And the way that you do that, of course, you've still got $360,000 of non-concessional contributions that you could put in using the bring forward rule. So $360 each makes $720 total. Yeah. And then you've got another $300,000 which you could contribute into super each within the 90 days of the sale. So you put this all together, you've gone from a super balance of, for simplicity, zero to a super balance of 1.3 mil in one financial year. Overnight, very quickly. And that I think this really speaks to the fact that the government is really leaning into this to encourage people get money into super, but also more importantly, as you said, giving people the ability to free up real estate and sell houses that are too big for you. Please sell them and allow people to move in that need these bigger houses, and please move somewhere to downsize into something that's more your size.
Yeah.
Now, there are some other conditions for this one. For example, as you're talking about, obviously ages, you need to be at least 55. But importantly, there's no age limit on this one. And so this can be important too when you consider that typically for superannuation contributions, you can only put money in, or you voluntarily put money in until age 75. So if you are over 75, or if perhaps your parents are over 75 and they're looking to sell and downsize, well, they've once again got the ability to put money back into this hopefully tax-free environment. Odds on it's likely to be.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a pretty wise place for them to place their money and still have the capacity to invest it and do all those sorts of things. So that's a terrific outcome.
Yeah, for sure. And it has to be owned by you or your spouse, and it has to be benefiting from the CGT concession.
That's right.
PPR, principal place of residence concession.
Correct. So you can have had the property as an investment property for a small time frame or for a time frame. There can be some CGT attributable, but predominantly you've got to qualify for the principal place of residence exemption. I think you have to own it for more than 10 years before the sale, from recollection.
Yeah.
So it's not a case that you can keep flipping properties as you're downsizing, get more and more money in super. Great strategy, but not an option. And this is the one that really got me. The home is not a caravan, houseboat, or other mobile home. Yeah, okay. Well, that's a shame for all of the grey nomads traveling around that want to downsize from the Jayco to the... I can't even play this game, mate. Help me, bail me out here.
Houseboat.
Houseboat, sure. Yeah. It's not an option. Still, all of this said, it's a pretty good feature, right?
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And I think it's a great opportunity and something that you don't want to be tripped up on. So, seek information, seek advice, and go through that emotional and financial process before you make the big decision.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, mate, I reckon that's a pretty comprehensive rundown of downsizing. Anything else to add?
And that's it.
All right. How easy is this? Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your audience-ship, listenership. It's definitely that second word. Once again, we've said it before, if you've got any questions, if there's anything that you want to learn, better understand, if there's any way that we can help you with your individual finances, then please hit us up. Ask a question. You can do that through the show notes. There's a link for you to ask any questions that you want. We will do our level best to answer as many of them as possible. And also, if you have the opportunity, we'd be super grateful for you to please give us a thumbs up on whatever medium you are listening to. You're also welcome to throw what we call an Australian retirement podcast party. That's where you'd have all of your friends around. You just pump that goodness straight through the speakers. Yeah, we would bring tortilla chips and all sorts of stuff to make that as enjoyable as possible. So if you want to do that, then please let us know. But
we're happy to sponsor it.
Yeah, of course we would. Yeah, we're going to be reasonable about it. But thank you, everyone. And again, if there's any way that we can contribute, please keep the questions coming because they really do help us to make sure that we're delivering stuff that we know that you care about.
Amazing. Good to be here.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for watching this video on the RAS Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.